It's Plastic EP with Chachi. We've got a very special VIP guest. Of course, we've got Michael, Lindsay Hogg, the man who filmed the Beatles in 1969, helped, as I said, filmed everything for the movie Let It Be. Just an amazing man that's historically recorded everything. And I just want to say welcome to you, Michael.
Thank you, Plastic EP. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. Now, if we take you back to 1969, with Peter Jackson now doing the movie, and he's going to show your concert footage in its entirety. I mean, you're the man that historically has recorded the Beatles for life. How thrilling is this, what's coming up in November, a 3-part Disney series with your entire concert being shown?
Well, I'm really happy about it because when we made the original Let It Be, which we filmed in 1969, I had to cut out at least half an hour from what became the released movie for various internal reasons to do with Beatledom at the time and what the majority opinion thought about, should we have this in it or that in it. And also, I didn't want to have the entire roof in because we'd been going through some of the songs before and rehearsing them and getting them better and stuff like that. And since I wanted it to look like a performance at the end of Let It Be, because we needed an ending, and so that's when I thought about, let's go up on the roof. I wanted it to be more like a full performance, not a bit of this and a bit of that. But I'm really thrilled that Peter is showing the whole thing because he's showing a kind of the work in progress of being a Beatle, being the 4 Beatles at that time, and what was really going on in their heads. And as he said to me, he's really making a documentary about the making of a documentary.
That's really interesting. Now, back then, Michael, were the Beatles hands-on once the film was completed, or did they just hand it to you and say, you do it? We don't want to be involved? Because Apple's really hands-on now. Was Apple hands-on back then, or they just gave it to you and said, do what you want to do?
Well, Apple, as it is constructed now, is not like Apple was then. Brian Epstein had died. Peter Brown, who'd been a great friend of Brian's, was involved. But Apple was more at the time run by Neil Aspinall, who had started life as the Beatles' van driver. I mean, we all have to start somewhere, and that's where Neil started. He was a good guy. He was tough. He got tougher as he went on, because that became, as the Beatles all separated, it became a harder and harder gig. Apple, which is what controlled all their various properties, it was the entity. So they weren't. Also, the thing I learned when we were doing the beginning Let It Be is, for all the different talents they had, visual or imaginative, they're musicians. And so what they really wanted to do was make music. And they really wanted to then see what was going to happen to this album. And then they took a little time off, and then they made their final album, and then they broke up, and all the Sturmendrang which came with that. So we originally started cutting in Twickenham, where we'd begun shooting, but then we brought the footage to Apple, and the editors and I had a little room in Apple. Occasionally, one of them would drop in and say, "Can you show me a few minutes?" And yeah, well, that looks pretty good. Okay, good luck. See you next week, whatever. They were not particularly hands-on because they had other things to do, and they figured, well, you know. And also, we'd worked together. First time was 1966. With Rain and Paperback Writer, then we did Hey Jude, then we did Revolution. And so they sort of trusted me. And also they were the producers. So it was going to stay kind of like they wanted, even though they weren't hands-on. Then we screened a rough cut on the day that Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, whatever day that was in 1969. And it was at least half an hour longer, if not even 40 minutes longer. And then John and Paul and Yoko and Linda and my girlfriend Jean Marsh and I and Peter Brown went out for dinner. Very nice, didn't talk about the movie. And then a couple of days later, Peter called me up and said, "I think that screening went pretty well." Yeah, I said, "All right." And he said, "Although maybe there's too much John and Yoko." And I said, oh, really? I thought it was kind of interesting. And he said, well, let me put it this way. I've had 3 phone calls this morning that said maybe there's too much John and Yoko. Oh, I sort of got that message. And so they were, when we were in the middle of Let It Be, the editing of it, although there was stresses between the 4 of them, it didn't look like they were going to break up. It looked like they would sort out their differences and that they would continue. Maybe one would go solo and then come back. Maybe George very much wanted to test his wings. He knew he was a good songwriter. Previously, he hadn't been given many cuts on the album because they went to John and Paul. So maybe George would have gone solo, maybe Paul would have gone solo, and then they would have come back together. That I think is probably what they thought would happen. But then because of some business choices they made, it didn't go that smoothly. And then animosities, which can break out even amongst the closest people, broke out and they broke up. But when we were editing Let It Be, I don't think they thought they're going to break up. And so what they hoped was Let It Be would be an interesting look at the 4 of them. The only time the Beatles had ever really let themselves be watched being rehearsing. And it would continue to be a Beatles movie, as opposed to something which was showing where the cracks were. Well, we showed some of the cracks.
With the song list that they played, and I know the police station wasn't too far away from the Apple building, had the police not stopped the concert, everybody I've spoken to is so interested to know what songs would they have played before they were stopped. Was there a list of songs that they would have continued playing?
Well, I've never even asked that before. Probably, but listen, the way Let It Be came to be started with the Hey Jude video. And we shot in the Same Day Revolution and Hey Jude, and as you know, if you've seen the video, we got about 150 people to come in and sing along with the chorus in Hey Jude, because I thought that even though they hadn't appeared for a while, just being on the 4 of them when da 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 started, it wouldn't be visually sufficient. And so that's when we got the people to come in. Okay, so we did about 6 takes on Hey Jude. And after every take, we'd have to reload the videotapes. And in those days, they'd have to be a virgin tape. So it couldn't be a reused tape because it was the Beatles and that would take 10 minutes to get the sync and the pulse rates and stuff. So they were standing on their rostrum surrounded by 150 people. In the first break, I went down and we talked to them, anything more we should do. No. Second break, they're still standing there. And then the instinct from Hamburg kicks in and they start to just jam a little bit. That's okay. And then we do another take 3. And then again, they're stuck on this little rostrum. And then they start to play what they always go to in times of trouble is old Tamla Motown songs. You really got a hold on me, Mickey's Monkey, whatever. And so in each break, which would be about 10 minutes long, we had 6 breaks, they would start to entertain the audience and entertain themselves. They just weren't standing there. And it was the first time they'd played to any kind of audience since '66. And this was '68. And they kind of enjoyed it. Because, I mean, don't forget, they're rock and roll musicians. I mean, they're not some people who live in ivory towers, although they probably wanted to at a certain point. They basically are musicians who want to play and who want to communicate. Okay, so that was the first time they played to any audience for a couple of. So then when I'm getting ready, the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, which, you know, is all happening around the same time, I get a call from Paul McCartney who says, "Do you want to come up and talk to us?" And so I said, sure. And he said, you know, when we were doing the videos for Hey Jude and we played to the audience, we sort of enjoyed it. We kind of got our groove back and thought maybe we would do a television special. Now, this comes back to Plastic EP's question. I think if they'd run out of Beatles songs they wanted to do, of course, how many of those there were, they'd have done what they did that day when we were doing Hey Jude. They'd have done Tamla Motown, they'd have done Chuck Berry. Those were the go-tos for the Rolling Stones would have done Muddy Waters or Rhythm and Blues. The Beatles were Motown, Little Richard. They'd have gone to that old catalog if they couldn't think of any of their own songs to play. So that's the answer to your question. I mean, I stumbled on other issues, but that's the answer to your question.
Now, Michael, when you certainly, as you said, you directed certain videos with the Beatles, and then you did Let It Be. You were kind of at the whim of the Beatles. You were in Twickenham. George Harrison at one point walked out, didn't want to go back there. You had to switch over to Apple Studios down below. And were you at the whim of whatever the Beatles wanted to do? You had to act quick. You weren't expecting to move to Apple. And so you as a director, I know you directed films and TV. Is it harder to direct rock stars than it is actors? And in the moments before they were about to go on the roof, it's been said that they were deciding right there whether they should go on stage or not and perform on the roof.
Well, that last bit is certainly true. Was it harder to? Well, you know, actors can be a pain in the ass too. It was very. I mean, I've been around, obviously, rock and roll musicians rehearsing. Certainly, the Rolling Stones, certainly the Who, because I was closer to them, I suppose, because their managers were friends of mine as well. They weren't hard to no, because it wasn't like a fiction movie that we were doing. It was became a documentary. Let me back. I'll come to answer your question. Listen to me back up for a second. So the original idea was we were going to do a television special, which was going to be screened in those days, one of the only, either BBC, ITV, Australian television, or NBC, CBS, or NBC, when those days were many fewer outlets. Television special, some ideas what it was going to be. And then Paul, smart idea, said, listen, as well as thinking about the TV special, why don't we shoot some documentary material, get a couple of cameras, and just shoot what's going on. And that can be the trailer to the TV special. So the TV special is going to be this extravaganza, which is going to take place God knows where. And then we'd also have like a half-hour trailer the week before the Beatles, you know, rehearsing, making jokes. It'd be probably not unlike what Peter put out around Christmas time, just, you know, the Fab Four. But then there were so many, and not to knock what Peter put out at Christmas time, it was a great tonic for everybody after the year they'd been through. So then we never agreed on what was going to be the television special. Was it going to be on an amphitheater in Tunisia on the coast of the Mediterranean? Was it going to be back at the cavern? Was it going to be in a field? Was it going to be on a boat? And no one could agree. At that point, George was getting frustrated because he really was much more interested in the album, in the music, and probably in contributing some of his own songs as well. And so he got frustrated and left for 4 or 5 days. And then he said he'd come back if all the kind of talk about a TV special went away and they just concentrate on the music. So therefore, it wasn't like I was making a fiction movie and I had a bolshy actor. I was making what then had turned into a documentary, and I was going to, I was along for the ride. Whatever was going to happen was going to happen.
Right. You're a fly on the wall. You're just
a fly on the wall.
Happening, you're taping.
Yeah, I'm a fly on the wall, or a wasp on a summer's day, one or the other. And that's, so then we go to Apple, and that's a totally different environment. They're much happier. It's much smaller. It's more intimate. Billy Preston comes and joins us at that stage, and it's like like there's a whole family together, squabbles like families have, and then a new person comes along and he's at the dinner table with you, and you're going to act a little bit differently anyway, also because he's a fine musician. So then I'm thinking we've got all this footage. And in those days, there are a lot of rock and roll projects which got half completed. And then someone would lose interest. Or because these big musicians, they're very bright, they're smart, but they sometimes can go off on a tangent, think that's a great idea, and then if that doesn't fulfill itself, then they'll go to something else. And then the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, Mick and Keith thought the Who were better than they were. And Keith said if it was called the Who's Rock and Roll Circus, I wouldn't care, but it's not. And so then the idea is where we're going to do the reshoots of the circus, and then the set had been torn down, blah, 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 and everything like that went on. And so I knew the stuff we were getting was fascinating to do with the Beatles rehearsing, because after all, it was the Beatles rehearsing, the Beatles interacting, but it's also the Beatles playing with each other. It wasn't only rehearsing Long and Winding Road or Maxwell Silver Hammer, it was how they were with each other. And yes, there might have been the occasional moments of tension, but don't forget they've known each other since they were 14, 15, and 16. And they really were like a marriage. And they got married very young. And they had great times together. And then as they matured, because by that time they were 27, 28, 29, as they matured, each of them was looking for a somewhat different life. Certainly their artistic lives, because that's how they grew up, but they were also looking, I mean, Paul more liked to be able to go home for dinner, regular time to be with his family, very much a family man. And John was investigating a more bohemian life with Yoko, who was denigrated when she came to England because no one knew she'd been really quite successful in the arts in New York in the 1950s. George wanted to make more music and have more of his songs available to people. And Ringo did what the drummer always does, contribute partly by observing and seeing what's going on and being able to be a counselor. It's like Charlie Watts is with the Rolling Stones. I mean, he's been there for 60 years. And I think the reason the Stones are still together is because of Charlie, because he has always been the head they go to. He's very extraordinary, amazing guy. But the drummer watches. You don't usually get songs from the drummer. Phil Collins was the drummer. There was that guy in the Eagles who was the drummer. But mainly the songs come from the front line, the guitar players. And the drummer is the one who says to you afterwards, gee, why did you do it like that? Whatever. Anyway, so I'm worried that the stuff we have, the footage we're getting, may not be able to be put in sort of a coherent way. So I thought we have to have a conclusion. We have to have somewhere, at least I know something will happen at the end, which will look like a culmination of what we've been doing for the last hour and a half. This is a documentary. So we were having lunch one day and I'd had this thought and I said, you wouldn't do it at the Cavern, you wouldn't do it on the coast of the Mediterranean, and you wouldn't do it on the boat. So why don't we just do it on the roof? And they said, do what on the roof? And I said, a concert.
Wow.
And then after the lunch, we went up, several of us, Paul and Ringo, and we looked around, we looked at London from the roof, and Paul jumped up on the boards on the roof sometimes to see if it was going to take the weight of the instruments. And I always say, and Billy Preston's organ. And then we had to shore it up with planks from underneath because it was a very old building. And then we were going to do it on the Thursday, but the weather was too bad. It was too cloudy and it was just a dull day. And so we went to the Friday, and this is going to be in Peter's movie, I'm pretty sure, there's a lot of, yeah, well, we'll do it. And I'm saying, but I kind of need to know if you're going to do it because I have to get 11 cameras and stuff like that. I say, yeah, well, don't you worry about that. We're the band. We know what we're going to do. And I say, but are you going to do it up there or where are you going to do it? And they say, well, just let us work on that. And this is like the day before. And And so then somehow I get them all together in the little ante room below the wooden staircase, which goes up to the roof. And it's not solid. Ringo says, it's cold up there. I mean, he'd sort of been for it, but it really was a cold day. You'd see them. I mean, it's tough to play guitar anyway if your fingers are really cold. It's probably tough to play the drums too. He's cold up there. And George said, "Yeah, but what's the point? You know, why? What's the point? What's the point? We don't need it. You know, it's getting weird being on a cold day on the roof." And then Paul said, "You know, we've got to do something. We just got to do something." I mean, because he felt I think they needed to circle the wagons. To go on as Beatles, which of course he wanted. I mean, yes, whether they go off and do separate albums, who cares? But he wanted to keep the group together because that's all he knew. And also I have a theory that if you're a singer like Paul is, and you're used to hearing those harmonies in your ear, since John and George and Paul, since the time you were 16, you really didn't want other voices in your ear. You wanted to hear that particular cadence and stuff like this. So anyway, he's saying we really got to do this. We got to do this. But it's a stalemate. Ringo, yeah, but it's cold. Yeah, it's true. George didn't want to do it. Paul said, yeah. And then it's silence. And so John and Yoko are standing there. And then John says, fuck it, let's do it. And then that was it. Then they go up the little ladder and go into history. Wow. But we didn't know it was going to be the final concert. I mean, it was. But the great thing for me about it was that once they got there, once they tuned up and once they started to play, is they really loved it. They loved being together. They loved performing. You can see it as they exchange looks on the roof, or if one of them sings a bit off or something like that, the interplay between them is really like, you know, when George was 14 and Paul was 15 and John was 16, they went back, they became who they always were. And so in fact, it's a beautiful ending. I'm talking about Let It Be now. And in Peter's picture, he's going to have the whole roof. So you're just going to get more of a beautiful ending. And also, I mean, you know, he's a very bright filmmaker who's used to dealing with enormous canvas. If you think of Lord of the Rings, and he has, even though it's only 4 people, and then the rest of the people who were involved in talking to them and being part of the whole story, it's quite a big canvas he's got now, and he's made the stuff look. He's got all that technology over in New Zealand, and he showed me at one point some original footage of Let It Be up against what he'd been working on in New Zealand. And in the Let It Be, we'll fix this too, but everybody's hair was like just lank. It was like it laid there like a sheet. And Peter, when he worked on it, you could see strands of hair. I mean, it really looked almost modern. And so you feel you're there. Probably when we put out Let It Be again, we will give it some sense of being an old movie because it's 50 years old, and we didn't do it today. Peter's will have a more up-to-date look, which will bring you into it in a different way. I mean, it's a very, I mean, I don't think they could have got, I mean, they talked to me about it. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to go back there. I'd done it 50 years ago, and it was what it is. And I think it's very good. But I'm very excited to see Peter's 6 hours. I mean, it'll be fun for us all. And then Let It Be will come out. They're gonna re-release it in some form, whether it also will go into Disney or it'll be theatrical, or I don't know. Wow. But I'm very glad about that because, first of all, Peter will willy-nilly have some stuff that I probably wanted to use and wasn't able to use. But one of the things which happened to Let It Be was that it was released in America in May 1970, and they'd broken up officially like 3 weeks before. And none of them came to the premiere in England at the end of 1969. And a lot of people thought of it as the breakup movie. And we're sad, because no one wanted the Beatles to break up, although no one wants the first marriage to break up. But things happen, people change, they evolve. But everyone thought it was the breakup movie, and therefore, even though it's not sad, it's happy, everything was examined under a laser microscope of, well, did you see the way he looked at him? Oh yeah, but that you could tell that they really weren't getting on. They, until they had the big breakup and the squabbles about money and management and stuff like that, they loved each other. But of course, people who've been together for a long time, of course they're gonna squabble. Of course there's gonna be some disagreement. Also, they're artists. I mean, they're not doing macrame, they're making songs. And that's a very intricate process. And also, does this person like, and also they weren't collaborating the way they used to collaborate so much, like when they were writing songs in Paul's bedroom or on the road. It was more because they were living separate lives. The songwriter would come in with the song and he'd give the others their chords, A, B minor, whatever, like, I'm not a musician. And so it was more like the songwriter would then get the guys with him, as opposed to the songwriting being as collaborative as it had been before. But just, to sum up my feeling, I'm really looking forward to seeing Peter's and then seeing my own one come out sometime after.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, this is fascinating. I've also got a lot of fans that have asked me, with the rooftop there at Apple, it's actually a very small space. And when you look at 1969, what you filmed and what you could do today had that happened, I mean, the technology has changed completely different. I need to know, basically, that setup is unbelievable. You've got like a metal barrier where anyone can go over the edge. You've got big cameras. I mean, can I ask how many cameras how you organized, how you were going to get the angles? Basically, how complicated was it to work it out then to do the shoot?
Well, we had, I think, 11 cameras. We had the ones on the roof, which I'll come back to in a second. We had one on a building across the road, which could get us wide angles of the roof. We had 1, 2, 3 in the street for crowd, and also a camera specifically in the street to follow any police activity. 3, 4, we had 6 on the roof, I think, 3, 4, that's 10. And then I built a little booth with a 2-way mirror in the lobby of Apple, so that in case the police did come in, we would be able to film them without them knowing it. I mean, they probably did know it, but at least it wasn't a guy with a camera standing there like that. We had a little hut. So I think we had 11 cameras. And I mean, the problem was, in those days, on that kind of setup, you didn't have any, when I did the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, although it was recorded on film, the images came into the equivalent of a television control room. And so I could cut the cameras and say, make that a close-up or make that a wide shot over the intercom with me and the camera guys. Whereas on the roof, I didn't have that. So it was really kind of hand signals to my DP, Tony Richmond, who also operated a camera himself, trying to, so that you didn't all end up with a close-up of John Lennon. So it was kind of managing the menu of the camera angles as well as the stuff in the street. I mean, I didn't see the stuff in the street till later, but I knew the guys who were doing the street stuff, and we talked before about some interviews, some crowd scenes, stuff like that. And then there were the police, and then, of course, there were the people in the building next door who I think had a haberdashery or textile or fabric company, selling beautiful English tweeds and wool or whatever. And they were from the other generation. They were the guys in bowler hats. Well, I mean, rock and roll music is all right in its place, but I mean, I don't think when it makes this racket but people are not coming into our building, I think it certainly should be stopped. And so there was that divide between the people who'd been in the Second World War, who basically were the parents of the kids. Because all of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, they were children of the Second World War. Their parents, their uncles, or their moms, or whatever, would have been in the war effort in some way. And then when the war was over, then it came rationing, food rationing. You know, you get 2 eggs a week and 1 rasher of bacon. Clothes, fabrics where, you know, you could have 1 suit a year or whatever. And so it was a bleak time. It was a bleak time. And these kids who were getting their influences now from America, from, you know, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Muddy Waters, they were anxious. They were pulsating for the new world, which they in fact made. And so and there was still a lot of resistance from the older generation to the younger ones at that time, even against, you know, the Beatles. Rolling Stones, certainly, you know, would you let your daughter go out with the Rolling Stone? But certainly against the Beatles too. And so the main complaint came from the wool store next door, and that's when the police had to, because of the noise, come in. And then we delayed it as long as possible. Mal Evans went down and started to talk to the police, and they said, well, it's very noisy up there. He said, oh, I didn't think it was so noisy. Oh, really? We haven't been out in the street. I've been up on the roof. Oh, it's really noisy. Okay, well, I'll go and talk to them to get it a little less noisy. So then Mal disappears for a while. And then he goes down and said, they need to make a certain amount of noise up there just because, you know, they're musicians and that's what they do. And then the police said, well, we'll have to shut it down. And then Mal said, well, come up on the roof and see what you think. And then, of course, this young Bobby goes on the roof and, you know, boy, is he going to have a story for his wife that night. That's not going to be like booking the drunk at Bow Street Prison or something. And so then they come up and then they kind of negotiate. They'll play one more song. And that's when Paul improvises the lyric, you know, you can play on the roof again. Your mom is going to have you arrested. And then it was all over. And then, this is your lucky day. John Lennon steps to the mic when it's over and says, I want to thank you on behalf of the band and ourselves. And I hope we pass the audition. I mean, if you're going to write it, you know, that was pretty amazing.
On behalf of Plastic EP and Chachi LaPrette, we'd like to thank Michael Lindsay Hogg for his time. It's been a fascinating, riveting interview, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, guys.
Peace.